Welcome back to the Moto Chiba YouTube channel, and thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, come back often, check out new videos, all that kind of stuff. I took advantage of the Indian Motorcycles demo truck visiting my closest dealership called Indian of Fredericksburg in Virginia to ride a few of their motorcycles, 3 on Friday and 3 on Saturday. I rode the Challenger Dark Horse Scout Bobber 20, Chieftain Limited with the mid-rise handlebar, Challenger Limited, Scout Bobber, and Chieftain Limited with the normal handlebar. Out of all of them, I think the Bobber 20 was the only one which had any performance modifications done to it. All the others were pretty much stock. In this video, I'm going to talk about the Challengers that I rode, and here in this specific video, I'm riding the blue Challenger Limited. They call the color Deep Water Metallic. It's very pretty, as you would expect. Certainly for a motorcycle that costs over $20,000, it better be very pretty. Stock, the Challenger Limited in this color, or the red they call Ruby Metallic, costs $28,750. If you get one in basic black, which they call Thunder Black Pearl, you can knock $750 off of that base price. Of course, they have all sorts of accessories you can add to the bike, but I'm going to tell you about the base setup for the Challenger Limited, which is what I think this bike was. The heart of the Challenger line is the liquid-cooled Power Plus V-twin engine at 108 cubic inches. For those of you raised on the metric system, which is, frankly, most of the world, that's 1,770 cubic centimeters. It's smaller than the 1900cc air oil-cooled engine powering their traditional line of heavy cruisers, but I'll talk about that engine in the Chieftain video you can find elsewhere on this channel. Indian claims the Power Plus engine puts out 122 horsepower at 5,500 RPM and 128 foot-pounds of torque at 3,800 RPM. The engine sports 4 valves per cylinder, and they're driven by overhead camshafts. This is very typical design, even in the 21st century. Gas and air get in there through a 52mm dual-bore throttle body, very standard, and all that effort gets to the ground through a slick 6-speed transmission and the bike's wet assist clutch. If you don't know what an assist clutch is, it's a clutch construction, I don't want to say gimmick, but that's the closest word I can think of, that allows the use of lighter clutch springs than you might normally see, and that gives the rider a lighter feel at the clutch lever. Plenty of videos out there on how that works. And note that it doesn't say that, the specs don't say that it's a slip and assist clutch, just an assist clutch. So that's a slightly different thing. The Challenger has a 6-gallon fuel tank, and the onboard computer told me I had about 250 miles of fuel with a full tank, so I figure the bike gets about 40 miles a gallon, about the same as my BMW R1200 GS does, maybe a little bit less. The bike weighs 840 pounds with the full fuel tank, but that's kind of a funny thing because even though the bike looks like a traditional bagger when it's sitting still, it doesn't really look like it should be that heavy. Certainly, once you start riding it, it doesn't feel that heavy, and when I had to make a U-turn at the end of the demo ride, it wasn't as difficult to U-turn as the Chieftain, at least the Chieftain with the tall handlebars. Maybe we can chalk that up to the 19-inch front wheel, which is fairly big for a cruiser, and it's just 3.5 inches wide, which is almost a standard adventure bike front wheel. The rear wheel has a 16-inch diameter and is 5 inches wide. You add an inch to that, and you've got a sport bike rear wheel. 17x5 is a very standard sport bike tire. Now, you may notice I've called this a demo ride a couple times, so let me explain why I'm not calling it a test ride. We went on a very specific route, all right turns actually, to help keep the group of 20 bikes together, and it was, to be honest, kind of a lame route. Flat and straight, with speed limits between 25 and 45. Absolutely no challenge at all, and that's okay. It's a demo ride after all, and you never know who's going to show up for these events. Indian makes bikes all the way from the light and nimble FTR to the super heavy couch tourer Roadmaster. So they have to have something suitable for raw beginner riders, but a route which will still give experienced riders a decent feel for the bike. A test ride, in my mind, is not a group ride like a demo ride is. For a test ride, the dealership copies your license, you maybe fill out some paperwork, they hand you the keys, and off you go for an hour or more, really several hours, if at all possible, to really check the bike out, to live with it a bit and see what you think beyond a 15 or 20-minute ride where you spend a lot of time waiting at stoplights. Anyway, I got off track. Let's get back to the Challenger. On the first day, I rode a Challenger Dark Horse, the one with the matte white finish. I'm not a fan of matte finishes on motorcycles, or guitars either for that matter, but it's a big trend in the industry and there's nothing I can do about that except maybe not to buy one. There was a lot of what sounded like valve clatter on that bike, so I wanted to make sure I rode a different Challenger the next day to see if it was just that one bike or if it was the engine overall. I was super happy to find out it must have just been that bike because the blue Challenger Limited I rode on Saturday had no valve clatter going on at all. Now, the engine is as smooth as you would expect from a liquid-cooled V-twin, and if I didn't think it would get me in trouble, I'd say that the engine was practically Japanese in nature. It sounded right, felt right, was perfectly smooth from idle all the way up to when the rev limiter kicked in somewhere above 6,000 RPM. I felt it, but I wasn't looking at the tachometer at the time, so I don't remember what I was doing at that exact time. I was in third gear. I never got the bike much above 50 miles per hour, not even at that point, so maybe I was in second gear. So I don't know what high-speed vibration over a prolonged ride might be, but my hands and feet weren't tingling or sore after the short demo ride. I'm about 6'3", and the standard seat and handlebar were fine for me. I could probably have adjusted the handlebar rotation a little bit to be happier, but it was good for what I was doing on the demo ride. I didn't feel the need for the extended reach seat and had plenty of room on the floorboards to move my feet back and forward. Speaking of floorboards, I have never owned a bike with big floorboards like this, so that was a really neat thing to experience. Because I had big feet, I avoided the bike they had set up with the heel and toe shifter. I have owned a bike with one of those, and my left foot is so big that I had trouble with it, the heel and toe shifter that is, not the left foot, and I couldn't wait to take that heel and toe shifter off and replace it with a standard shifter. The reach to the forward foot controls is nice, and I had no trouble shifting at exactly the right spot on my foot. It was a little weird having to lift up my right foot to use the rear brake, but I got used to that after a few minutes and didn't have any trouble with it. And the rear brake isn't super duper powerful, but it did the trick. I can totally see now why especially older riders love cruisers so much. Not having your knees bent and your feet underneath you is a pretty comfortable riding position, and my bad knee didn't give me much trouble despite the incoming stormy weather, making it hurt just kind of in general all throughout the weekend. Enjoy your youth, folks, and do everything you can to avoid getting arthritis. It was weird having all my weight right on my butt, but the Challenger's seat was pretty comfortable. Obviously, for a 20-minute ride, I'm not testing its capabilities to a high extent, but I didn't notice anything bad about it, so I'm sure the seat is fine for most people. Here's one weird little gripe, though. On Friday, I had trouble with where to place my hand on the grips on both the Challenger and the Chieftain because the mirrors are so close to the grip that since I had on my gloves made by a company called Revit, these things have a hard plastic plate over the back of the knuckles that are supposed to give you better protection in case of a crash. Because of that design, I had to be really deliberate with my hand placement and movement on those big Indian cruisers. When I went back on Saturday, I took a different pair of gloves, ones that didn't have that external hard plate. And that day, I had a lot less trouble with where to put my hand or moving it on either the Challenger or the Chieftain. So if I was going to buy a bike like this, I would definitely want to put mirrors with taller stalks on them because I really like those external gloves, those gloves with the external protection. On both days, I had different people sort of warn me about the narrow friction zone of the Challenger's clutch. Maybe it's because they're used to riding air and oil-cooled Indians, and I'm used to riding bikes with hydraulic clutches like my BMWs, or one with a zingy sport clutch. I have an FTR 1200. I had zero trouble with the clutch on the Challenger. I had no trouble with it at all, despite these warnings of the small friction zone. It felt perfectly natural to me. It's a straight cable clutch, not hydraulic. And the light feel on the lever is due to lighter than you'd expect springs in the clutch assembly. That's the assist clutch mechanism that I mentioned earlier in the video. Now, the clutch and brake levers are wide, though, which was a weird thing to experience and took me a few minutes to get used to. I'm used to fitting the levers into the crook of one of my knuckles, but with the Indian Cruisers, and now all 6 of them that I rode, mind you, the clutch levers especially felt weird because they're so wide. I'm sure I'd get used to it if I owned one, but for the short demo ride, it was distracting, and I really had to think about every time I reached for one of the levers, and that kind of distraction can be a little bit dangerous. That's why it's important to get used to a motorcycle after you buy it, I guess. I didn't mess with the Ride Command infotainment system on the Challenger Limited, but it really is a heck of a thing to witness. It's got built-in pretty much everything, I guess, just like if you were in a car. Just about the only thing it doesn't have is Apple Play, and I hear you can install that now if you want. I can't speak to the navigation system because I didn't use it, nor did I use the radio. I honestly don't understand the appeal of having a loud-ass radio built into your motorcycle, but perhaps it's one of those things about cruiser culture that just doesn't resonate with me. I wanted to listen to the engine, the transmission, the wind noise, not the local classic rock or country station. After all, I'm trying to evaluate a motorcycle over here, not get my Led Zeppelin fix in. One of the differences between the base models and the higher-end models, like the Dark Horse and the Limited, are the inclusion of navigation. I'm not sure that having an onboard GPS is worth part of a $6,000 upcharge, but then again, I'm used to using aftermarket GPS solutions from companies like Garmin or Beeline. At any rate, the Ride Command system was fairly easy to work through to get to what I wanted, which was to set the bike to the standard riding mode. These things have 3 modes: rain, which is sometimes called touring mode, then standard and sport mode. They all deliver the bike's full power, but how the throttle reacts is what changes. In sport mode, you get all the throttle right away, and you best not have a twitchy hand. In rain mode, the bike's computer slows down the throttle response, theoretically to keep you from crashing because you twisted that wrist a bit too quickly in substandard traction conditions. A lot of people put these bikes in sport mode during the demo rides, which is fine, but I'm not out there measuring dicks or trying to impress anybody, so I put mine and kept them in standard mode. Now, the Challenger comes with cruise control, which I also didn't try out, but my FTR has cruise control, so I kind of assume it's about the same operation, and the cruise control on my FTR works great, so the one on the Challenger probably does too. The suspension is a pretty standard setup for cruisers, from what I understand, but it does have one little twist. It's got a single shock rear suspension, typical for bikes like this, and it's well hidden, so you don't have to look at any ungainly springs. As a matter of fact, you can't even really see it unless you really look hard, and to get a good look at it, you got to pop a cover off. The front suspension, though, is an upside-down fork, or they call inverted telescopic fork, and that was a nice surprise. It's a 43 millimeter diameter, and Indian claims it has 5 inches of travel. I think they pretty much got that right. The Challenger suspension felt pleasantly firm, not so much that it felt sporty, but firm enough the bike didn't wallow over rough pavement or bounce much under hard acceleration or heavy braking. The rear shock is adjustable for preload only, and I couldn't find anything in the owner's manual about adjusting the front suspension, so I assume it's not adjustable. Even though the demo route was a little boring and we spent some time sitting at stoplights, I liked the Challenger a lot. It's easy to hold up at a stop, and not a lot of heat comes off the engine. Certainly not as much as the Chieftain, and people kind of complained about that sometimes with the Chieftain, not the Challenger. Wind protection is good, and being able to raise and lower the windshield with a simple button was nice. But I experienced a decent amount of buffeting with the windshield all the way up. I figure I'd probably benefit from a taller windshield, but that's purely subjective, so I definitely don't consider it a downside. I'll tell you this, though, that frame-mounted fairing is fantastic. That's got to be the reason why the bike looks so much like a traditional bagger, although obviously a modern-looking one, but it handles so much better than a bike with a fork-mounted fairing. Having the weight of the fairing handled by the frame rather than feeling it through your hands is great. And believe it or not, the Challenger reminded me a lot of my BMW R1200 GS, though yes, the GS is a lot more nimble and 200 pounds lighter. Maybe more. The Challenger is definitely a bike I could see myself riding long distances and long days on, but with just 2 small side cases holding a total of about 18 liters of stuff, I definitely have to put some kind of a luggage rack on the back. The locking hard saddlebags have a weight limit of 22 pounds each, which doesn't sound like much, but when you're talking about clothes and whatnot, it's a good amount of storage. I didn't test out the anti-lock brake system, but overall I found the brakes to be quite competent, and the front brakes are a good balance of smooth and powerful. The rear brake never locked up, and I got on it hard a couple of times to see if I could find a limit for it in the context of a group ride like that. It's hard not to compare the Challenger to the Chieftain because they really are different bikes thanks to the way that the fairings are mounted. Where the Challenger is nimble at low speeds thanks to its narrow front tire and frame-mounted fairing, the Chieftain can wallow a bit even though it has the same size front wheel simply because of the weight of that big fork-mounted fairing. You can really feel the difference between the models in your arms and shoulders. Where before I was seriously considering a Chieftain, if I go for a cruiser, I'm now leaning much more towards the Challenger, especially if Indian gets around to offering a luggage rack for the back or some other way of easily securing a duffel bag. I don't care so much about having a big touring trunk. Those are kind of unwieldy and ugly looking and definitely affect performance. So I think if Indian made a decent luggage rack for the Challenger, it might turn into a fantastic touring bike. Okay, I think that's going to do it for the Indian Challenger demo ride video. Thanks for watching, and please like, subscribe, comment, etc. I'll do my best to answer any questions you might have by checking out the comments from time to time. Please check out my podcast. It's called Chasing the Horizon, and it's all about the motorcycle industry and the people who create the things that we ride and use. You can find it at chasingthehorizon.us. In the meantime, I'll see you out there somewhere on the road. Or off it. Ride safe.